Hello and welcome to On the Money, where we provide you with all of the very latest business, economics and consumer news. I'm Alastair Stewart, standing in for Liam Halligan. And today we are taking a trip to space. NASA is preparing to launch the first rocket in its Artemis project, sending astronauts ultimately back to the moon. It is the most powerful rocket ever made. Now, it's scheduled for 1:33 p.m. There is a 2-hour window to get Artemis 1 in the air. Will we have liftoff? We'll be hearing the commentary from space experts to astronomers and astrophysicists. So stay tuned. We do know that there's already a delay. We'll be dealing with that straight away. But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the other news today. Here's Rosie.
Good afternoon. It's 1:02. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. Now, as we've just been hearing, NASA is making its final preparations ahead of the launch of its new moon rocket shortly. The unmanned rocket is the world's most powerful to date. We can see live pictures of preparations now. It's going to propel a test capsule called Orion far from Earth into the moon's orbit. It's the Artemis 1 mission. It's aiming to prove that people can go to the moon for longer and more sustainably than ever before. Now, it's scheduled to take off from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Engineers are currently working towards a 2-hour launch window that opens just after 1:30. When that happens, of course, we'll bring you live coverage of it here on GB News. In some other news now, in the final week of campaigning in the Conservative leadership contest, Liz Truss's team says she favours targeted support to ease the cost of living crisis. The Tory leadership candidate, though, says she's not ruling anything out. Ms Truss also says it wouldn't be right to announce her entire plan before she's seen the full Whitehall analysis. Well, Global Chief Executive of market research company Ipsos, Ben Page, says the Foreign Secretary's under pressure.
Public now wants to see more action and more spending. She's slightly against the grain of the things that she says she stands for, but she's probably going to be forced to do it when she turns her attention from the small number of people who are, of course, choosing the leader of the Conservative Party to the electorate as a whole.
Environment Minister and Team Rishi supporter Victoria Prentice told us the former Chancellor believes help should go to those who need it most.
Rishi's plan is very much to target that help at the most vulnerable households. So, for example, pensioner households or people with disabilities or households on the lowest incomes. And I think that's the right way to go. I know this is hard for everybody, but for some people it's really hard and we need to help them get through it.
Residents living near Europe's biggest nuclear facility in Ukraine are being given iodine tablets amid fears of a nuclear incident. Authorities handed out the medication to parents and children living close to the Zaporizhzhia power station amid intense fighting there. A team from the International Atomic Energy Agency is on its way to investigate the now Russian-occupied facility, saying its safety and security must be protected. The Queen has sent a message to the President of Pakistan saying she's deeply saddened by the tragic loss of life and destruction due to flooding across the country. Pakistan have appealed for international support as more than 1,000 people have been killed. Unusually heavy monsoon rains have caused floods in both the north and the south of the country, destroying farmland, crops and impacting more than 30 million people. The country's foreign minister is requesting financial help and aid from United Nations member states.
They're absolutely devastating. I haven't seen any destruction or devastation of this scale. I find it very difficult to put into words. The phraseologies that we're used to, whether it's monsoon rains or flooding, doesn't quite seem to encapsulate the ongoing devastation and disaster that we're still witnessing.
The Royal Navy's largest warship has broken down off the south coast of the UK shortly after embarking for exercises in the US. HMS Prince of Wales left from Portsmouth Naval Base on Saturday when a mechanical issue occurred. The 65,000-tonne vessel's departure had already been delayed because of a technical issue. The government's confirmed Gibraltar's status as a city more than 180 years after it was first bestowed the title by Queen Victoria. Well, that had been awarded in 1842, but it was then left off the official list of recognised cities. Now, a newly published record confirms Gibraltar's inclusion. The Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, describes the decision as a huge accolade to its rich history and dynamism. This is GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head back to On the Money.
Live television, absolutely love it. Because in half an hour, as Rosie just said, NASA was due to launch Artemis, the twin sister to Apollo, but already there is a delay. Now, we're going to talk about everything in the background to it. We're going to follow every moment as it happens, if it happens. But let's first of all deal with what is the breaking news. And I'm delighted to be joined live here in the studio by astronomer Mark Thompson. We were rushing around out there over coffee and stuff. You're the expert. What do you think has gone wrong? They are simply saying it was originally scheduled to launch at 08:33 local time from the Kennedy Space Center. It can be pushed back as far as 10:33 local time, but after that, it gets tricky. First of all, what do you think is likely to have gone wrong?
Well, what they've been doing at this stage is they've been filling the tanks and they've been getting the engines prepared for launch. And that means essentially flushing liquid hydrogen through the engines. Now, there's 4 engines as part of the Artemis rocket. And they've been trying to get the third engine down to the right temperature, but they were struggling to get it down to the temperature. Now, they've identified a leak, which sounds terrible in the world of space exploration, but they've identified a leak that they thought could have been structural. It looks like it's not structural. There's a layer of foam in between the outer tank and the inner tank, and it looks like there's just a crack in there, which has caused some of the air from the atmosphere to seep in, cool down from the liquid hydrogen, and it's that they can see seeping.
OK, I'm going to ask the director, can we put up the pictures that we are getting for the live feed from Florida as we carry on this conversation? If we've got them, I think we have done somewhere. There's the quotation, which also helps you understand it. The second point, and I love the jargon of this, and that's why I love having you here, because it then explains it. There are other windows on the 2nd of September and the 5th of September, if, God forbid, we get to that point, but hopefully it'll go OK. But there's another lovely line here. These launch windows are largely driven by the rocket's flight termination system, the FTS, which has a battery certified for 20 days, beginning with the installation. I mean, $4 billion and a battery's life is something upon which it could all hinge.
There are so many different things that this could all hinge upon. And aborting is a massive part of space exploration. They've got to be able to abort systems, not so much for this launch because there's no humans on board, but it could still go horribly wrong. And it's really important, especially when we get people sat in the rocket, that we can abort it at the right time.
Absolutely. And there we have now that we've split the screen, which is lovely. This has got nothing to do with science or economics, but isn't that just a magnificent and beautiful picture? Have you actually ever had the opportunity to go there and watch a launch?
I have seen a launch, and a launch experience is second to none. Maybe a solar
Is it
eclipse.
Physical as much as anything?
It's so physical. You see the rocket launch first, and because of the distance between you and the rocket, after a while you then hear the rocket launch, and then you feel the launch, and that launch is the feeling, the whole body vibrates. It's just an incredible feeling. And then you hear this wonderful cacophony of sounds as all the car alarms are set off in the vicinity through the vibration. It's almost like the cars are cheering from the launch. It is the most incredible thing. It's visual, it's auditory, and it's even physical as well. And
one of the most popular clips on YouTube is still that poor soul who spent all that money and all that time and was pointing at the wrong rock. But this, again, we're looking at it now. This actual site with those pylons next to it, which thank God were there yesterday picking up lightning strikes and stuff like that, that is the one going back to the late 60s that put Apollo on its way to put Armstrong and others on the moon.
Yeah, so they're reusing most of the launch system on site.
Is that kind of historic and emotional, or is that because it's scientifically the best place to do it from?
It's cheaper. Ultimately, there's stuff there that still works, so there's no emotion attached to it. It's simply a system that works. Why would you change it?
All right, fine. Well, you stay where you are as long as you've got your sources.
I've got my update coming through.
And then, genuinely, because it's live telly, if something suddenly happens,
I will poke.
Nudge me and we'll break in. But for the time being, Mark Thompson, thank you very much indeed. Excellent. So, in half an hour or so, NASA is due to launch Artemis, twin sister to Apollo, and it was Apollo, of course, which put the first man on the moon half a century ago. But latest updates show that those technical issues might just delay it. Now, the launch itself, when it happens, will cost US taxpayers little over $4 billion. And it is but the first of several launches in a near $100 billion programme to return to the moon, to put people there again, and even explore the possibility of a permanent research centre. It's also a first step toward the ultimate aim of getting people on Mars and putting people there at some juncture in the future. Now, as President Jack Kennedy said all those years ago, the United States chooses to do these things not because they're easy, but because they are hard. Had it not been for his personal ambition, the support of United States taxpayers, and the determination of United States governments, it wouldn't have happened. How things have changed in half a century. NASA and the United States government are back in the game, but so too are not one, but three private enterprise billionaires. Branson, Bezos and Musk have all made personal fortunes and spent part of their money on putting people into space. Now, in a sense, they're competitors to NASA, but they're also collaborators and even subcontractors. And from Apollo to Artemis, the astronomical spend on space has been a huge boost to the United States economy and arguably the world economy, its high-tech sectors, its aviation sector, and much more besides. So this is the stuff of science fiction come true, but it's also the hardcore economics of how the world's economy now works and how at a time of potential recession and a cost of living crisis, these are projects that still boldly go to significant effect on the world's economy, how we live and the standard of living that we enjoy. So space travel, yes, but money too. And you are on the money. And to discuss that, I'm delighted now to be joined by Tom Harwood. We were very excited talking about this about an hour ago. In your view, as an observer of these political and economic shifts, how significant is that link-up that we've now got not one but three individual citizens worth billions who want part of this game?
It's fascinating. It all speaks to the fundamentals of what was back in the 1950s and 60s a space race. Then it was between two superpowers. Now the real race, potentially the most exciting innovation in space, is still a competition, but a competition between private enterprises. And this has all kicked off really only in the last decade or so, starting with when NASA started using contractors and opening up commercial programs towards the end of the early 2000s. That has really kicked off the most remarkable sense of competition and crucially driving down costs.
Yeah, the other thing that I find fascinating, and I mentioned it in my opening observations, is that there's competition between the three of them, and people have said, oh, it's just, billionaires waving their wallets and other bits and bobs around. But actually, they are also collaborators with NASA. They are customers. Bezos offers reusable rockets, and I think you were saying that Musk is going to build the actual bit that will land on the moon with people on board when that moment comes.
That's right. There was an open tender and lots of different companies all bid to be the company that would land Artemis 3 astronauts on the moon with what's known as a human landing system. What happened was SpaceX won that contract. It was last year, I believe, and NASA gave SpaceX a lot of money to develop that human landing system. It's based off the Starship rocket that SpaceX has been building down in Boca Chica, Texas, and now in Florida as well. This is I'm sure people will have seen some of these hops, these not quite orbital hops, that of the testing that has gone into that rocket that SpaceX is building, going to be an entirely reusable one. A version of that will land humans on the moon, potentially as early as 2025 if everything goes completely smoothly.
It used to be said of the United States economy that they either needed to be involved in space projects or they needed to have a war. Either way, they needed one of those two to keep the economy going. These are tough times here in the United Kingdom. They are tough times in the United States as well. Therefore, $100 billion overall on Artemis really matters.
It does, and it's interesting looking back to the 1960s and 70s when the space race was won by the Americans the last time man landed on the moon, December 1972, half a century ago. Why did we stop going? Well, look at the context, the political and economic context of the early 1970s. The Vietnam War was not going well for the Americans. There was the oil crisis. Indeed, there was the first Earth Day. People started looking inwards, and NASA's budget crashed from about 5% of the US budget down to 0.5% of the US budget. That's why it's so important that there are private sector players now in the market, because they are commercial operations. It doesn't matter if a president decides that they need to spend more on the domestic economy or if political situations change and that changes NASA's budget, because now you've got those private players. That's going to make a much more sustainable future in space.
I'm going to come back to you. No, first of all, any news?
Do you know what? Nothing at all at the moment.
Okay, well, that's fine. Then we'll park that and we'll come back to it.
Sure.
But your thoughts on that? Because Tom and I wanted to have that conversation.
Yes.
Because I think it is quite profound.
It is, and it's very difficult. And I think with all the pressures that governments have around the world at the moment, there are massive pressures and cost challenges. We just come out of the back of the COVID pandemic, which has cost the governments millions of pounds, in some cases billions. But I think, you know, if you could stop the world's problems by just throwing cash at it, I would be the first person to head over to NASA and lobby for stopping space exploration. But I don't think throwing cash at it will solve the world's problems. You're looking at something very...
I'm just saying that. Can we put that picture of the engines up on our transmission? Because if we can, hang on a moment, here it comes.
Wonderful.
Okay, right. The reason I wanted to do that, right? Okay, bottom left-hand corner of the screen. Steam, gas, something coming out. Is that a good sign?
It's absolutely normal. So what you're seeing is there's the two outer parts that you can see. There's big tubes on the outside of the solid rocket boosters. They are not controllable. Once NASA launched those, you are going into space.
Yeah.
Then in the centre is the liquid hydrogen, liquid oxygen rocket system, which is those four. You can see two of them. There's two on the other side. Yeah. One of those engines is the one that's the problem. But the steam, the sort of the vapour you can see, that's where they're sort of purging the engines to try and cool them down to the optimum temperature.
Okay, we'll keep an eye on that. Stay where you are, but again, keep watching your sources, as it were. Tom, for the time being, thank you very much indeed. Joining us also, I'm delighted to say, is space expert and commentator Andy Lown. Andy in the middle there, and also astrophysicist at the University of Nottingham, Dr. Maggie Liu, who I've been honoured and delighted to talk to on previous occasions. Let me come to you, first of all, Andy, if I may, and just to pick up on the general observation about why this particular rocket, and we were looking at the huge size of it a moment ago, you've got the big four engines on the main body of it, but you've also got the boosters at either side. Why does it need to be that much more powerful than Apollo was?
Well, what it wants to do, it wants to actually launch a heavier payload. And this, of course, the one that they're going to be hopefully going to be launching is the Block 1, which is actually going to be smaller than Block 1B, which is actually going to carry astronauts and equipment further up. And there's also going to be another one, which, of course, is Block 2, which is a cargo version of it. And what we have now is better technology. So this is why we're actually going to get heavier payloads up into space and better equipment off to the moon. So it has to be a very different animal to what the Saturn V was. And also the way this one is designed, of course, this one is designed based on space shuttle technology. I mean, the four engines that you've got at the central core there, they're actually space shuttle style engines. In fact, some of them are reused from the space shuttle program. And the two solid boosters on the side are actually a derivative again of the solid boosters that was used on the space shuttle. So this is, if you like, the next generation on from the space shuttle using that style of technology.
Yeah, understood loud and clear. Maggie, let me bring you in at that point as well and remind folk, as it were, you're not just an enthusiast, which clearly you are, and that's delightful, but you are an academic. You grasp the history of this and also the astrophysics of it. I get a real buzz with the Webb telescope, and I get a real buzz looking at Artemis. Is this a new golden era?
Is this a new golden era for mankind? We're potentially going back to the moon, but not just going there. The Artemis program is developed to establish a permanent base on the moon. They want to facilitate humans to actually be there like personally, for long periods of time, they want to establish essentially an international space station around the moon. They call it the Lunar Gateway, so it will be easier to access the lunar surface in the future. This is completely different from what we saw 50 years ago with Apollo. And also, with Apollo, we've had 12 men go to the moon, but 8 of them have already died. The remaining 4 are all in their late 80s. It's some in their 90s. And we haven't been back since that. It might be very soon that there's no human on Earth alive anymore that's ever been to the moon. And that would be really tragic.
Well, and also in addition to that, and I'm not into the wokey thing and that terrible argument, but there is also, as it were, in passing, talking to a very senior woman who is an astrophysicist. There's a woman director of this project, and NASA are clear and upfront that those next people who go to the moon and maybe ultimately Mars should better reflect the world that we now occupy compared to the world that we occupied in the 60s. Does that matter to you, or is it a token gesture of wokery?
I think it absolutely does matter, because part of what inspired me to do astrophysics was seeing like my science teachers as women, as these really successful people who had doctorates, and that wasn't something that was known to me. So having these kind of role models really does inspire younger people to get into those projects. I went to an all-girls school, so it wasn't such a huge problem for me to study a science project. But I know that most people who study science will come from an all-girls school, because in mixed schools, they'll be like taken made fun of essentially by the boys, because it's like more of physics is a boys' subject, really.
Well, speaking as a brilliant and eloquent contra-arguer to that, Maggie, thank you very much indeed. I'm going to ask Maggie and Andy and also Mark here in the studio to stay with me, because we're going to take a quick break. Perhaps we can just cut up the picture, can we, again from Florida, while we remind you that where we are waiting, the window of opportunity is now just a few minutes ago. Mark said they were trying to cool it down, make sure the fuel system is okay, and if it is, hey, we're still in business possibly for a launch while we are on air. This is The Money with me, Alistair Stewart, and after the break we'll be keeping that discussion going with my expert panel, anticipating the launch of NASA's most powerful rocket yet, Artemis 1. Stay with us, you're on The Money.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome back. You're on the money with me, Alastair Stewart. We've been following NASA's rocket launch closely. They are still scheduled for liftoff of Artemis 1, which has been delayed due to a technical issue. It intends ultimately to send astronauts to the moon in what's the most powerful rocket ever to be made. This time it is unmanned. There's just a little capsule at the top of it. Mark Thompson is in the studio with me. Why don't they, instead of spending $4 billion to do this test flight, which I can understand you've got to do that, but can't they do that on computer simulation? Why do they have to physically do it?
Do you know, I don't think a computer simulation never deals with real-world problems like the problem we're seeing now, and I think you have to run through the actual system. And also, this is also about testing what it's going to be like for humans. So they've got these mannequins, which they've called moonikins. Took someone ages to think of that, I'm sure. But they're testing new spacesuits, and they've got the mannequins or the moonikins inside with sensors to see what kind of vibrations they're going to experience, to see what...
And what is this business about a model sheep or a toy sheep or a cuddly sheep?
They're trying to see what it's going to do to the human being, and by sticking in various different models, and they've got stuff in there that sort of simulates human flesh to see what kind of levels of radiation they're going to experience. So it's all about seeing what's going to happen to humans. OK, fine. Now, can we, again, my director will either love me for this or hate me for it, but there we are. Can we cut up the picture again, because Mark is my man on these matters, and I'll then come back to Maggie and Andy. Have we got full... There we have it. OK, what am I looking at? So what we're looking at... And am I looking at good news, bad news, or no change? We're looking at totally no change at all. We're still in this hold. What we're looking at is the very top, the spire you can see at the top is the launch abort system, which gets jettisoned shortly after launch. But the main bulk of that white portion is the command module. It's called the Orion portion, which is the command module, and the European-built service module, which will be the bit that actually goes to the moon. But we're still waiting for this response from the cryo team. It sounds wonderful, doesn't it? Cryo's
brilliant. I like cryo.
The cryo team are waiting to come back to the mission controller with their plan, whatever that's going to be.
Again, same rules as before. If you have something, nudge me, kick me, or shout at me. We'll go to it. I'm going to ask Maggie and Mark to rejoin us, our guests down the line. Can we do that? Maggie, my Nottingham University astrophysicist. Lovely to see you again. Change tack completely now, Maggie, if you will, and revert to pure astrophysicist. I can get the desire to go back to the moon. I can understand that, relatively speaking, it's pretty straightforward because we've done it before and we've learned some lessons in between. Mars is a big reach, scientifically and in terms of physics.
Yeah. This mission to the moon is going to take about a week to get there. To Mars, you're looking at 6 to 9 months of journey. So it's such a huge leap, right? And the majority, like we send regularly missions to the moon into their orbits and even landers. The missions that we've sent to Mars, like 2/3 of them fail, and the only successes are generally the US and then China as well recently. So the moon is a huge stepping stone from Mars is a huge stepping stone from the moon, but establishing this kind of lunar gateway and this permanent base on the moon will allow us to potentially extract any fuels and other important materials that are needed to go further beyond into our solar system. It's really expensive to launch things into space. Even things like water is such a rare resource. And if we can find that on the moon, which we think we can, then that would be fantastic.
Maggie, the next voice that you'll hear will be my friend Tom Harwood, who's still with me. Relax, Andy, I'm going to come back to you in just a moment, but she's opened the door on exactly what we were talking about earlier on. There's a big picture here as well. What is there to be found and what is there, use that word, to be exploited?
Yes, it's interesting. Of course, there are all of these different proposals at the moment, mining asteroids and everything else, and the prospects of using the materials that are out there in wider space. But I don't think that this is going to be a commercially viable prospect anytime soon. Really, if we're looking at the water deposits on the dark side of the moon, the stuff that hasn't evaporated away, that's useful for sustaining missions when they're there. It's not necessarily great to bring back home. Although Although, clearly, looking at the cost of all of this, the cost of doing this is a lot cheaper now than it was 50 years ago. The cost of getting a kilogram into low Earth orbit has come down by a huge degree, particularly because of the billionaires that we were talking about a little bit earlier. The fact that so many of these rockets can be reused now, or at least partially reused, that's brought down the costs for obvious reasons. Now, this Space Launch System, SLS, Artemis 1 is obviously not reusable, but there'll be elements of it, particularly the human landing system that kicks in a few years' time, that will be, and that does bring down costs.
Andy, thank you for your patience and listening to that. I want to go back. I'm referring to you, Andy, as the man with the model. No, is Andy still there? Yeah, he is. Excellent. Your comment on the Mars aspect of it, because that model, which is a cracking piece of work and delightful, is that also a prototype for the kind of vehicle that we would need if Maggie's ambition and NASA's ambition, indeed, to get to Mars were to be fulfilled? Or are they going to have to even rethink that baby, which they rethought from the Apollo days?
Yeah, I think the SLS system has sort of evolved over a very long period of time from the space shuttle, and even this system is actually going to evolve again. Once you get the first 3 missions out of the way, this being the first one, and then you've got the manned orbital mission, and then you've got the crewed landing mission. This system is actually going to constantly redevelop. So I think to go to Mars, if they're going to use the same sort of system, the Americans are going to have to evolve the SLS to be a more efficient system than even it is now, really. And they're slowly being overtaken almost by the private sector, which have reusable equipment, which is much more cost effective and much more efficient. Whereas the governmental agencies like NASA are still really using an older style system and have really been overtaken by the private sector. I think the private sector is going to play more and more of an important role, even when going to Mars.
Yeah. Andy, the next voice that you will hear again, as I said to Maggie a moment ago, will be Tom Harwood, who was getting very excited at the last 30 seconds of what you were saying. So you should be able to hear Tom Harwood now.
Yes, it's very crucial to talk about the staging post that NASA is seeing this as. There's something called the Lunar Gateway, which originally was meant to be part of this whole Artemis mission and is now sort of being treated as a separate project by NASA. That's about creating a space system, a sort of a small space station that orbits the moon, something that people could then go from Earth to this Lunar Gateway, and then from the Lunar Gateway off to Mars. Obviously takes a hell of a lot less energy to escape lunar orbit than Earth.
When did you get hooked on all of this stuff? You and I talk about politics the whole time. We've never talked about space before.
Do you know what? I read a biography of Elon Musk back when I was at university, and I've been absolutely hooked on SpaceX. I've been hooked on seeing the rapid development of the Falcon 9 rocket.
Great to be able to talk to Andy and Maggie as well about it.
Oh, absolutely.
Andy and Maggie, for the time being, thank you very much indeed. Don't go anywhere. We're on air for another 27 minutes, and I got so much more I want to chat to you about. Ditto, Mr. Harwood, and ditto, Mark. Just before we go to the break, no news to develop, no breaking news?
There's nothing at all. We're still waiting for that plan from the cryo team, that fabled plan.
And again, we're relaxed because their window today, we've still got an hour and a half to run.
We've still just about got time.
All right, Mark, for the time being, thank you very much indeed. And indeed, thanks to all of our guests. You're watching On the Money with me, Alastair Stewart. Coming up, we'll have more discussion on NASA's mission to the moon. If anything changes, if there are any developments, we'll bring them to you straight away. And hopefully, fingers crossed, you will see the launch of the most powerful rocket in history. Let's wait and see. But before all of that, let's bring you up to date with all of the other news that's occurring today. Here's Rosie.
Thanks, Alistair. It's 1:34. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date today in the GB News newsroom. As we've been hearing, NASA is making final preparations ahead of a planned launch of its new moon rocket. That could happen anytime in the next couple of hours. Engineers are assessing several issues, including a crack in the thermal protection system and a problem with the operating temperature. We can see live pictures of it underway. The unmanned rocket is the world's most powerful to date. It's going to propel a test capsule called Orion far from Earth into the moon's orbit. It's the Artemis 1 mission. It's aiming to prove that people can go to the moon for longer and more sustainably than ever before. Now, the rocket is scheduled to take off from the Kennedy Space Center this afternoon. That could be imminent. As soon as it happens, as Alistair's been telling you, we will bring it to you here live. In some other news now, and residents living near Europe's biggest nuclear facility are being given iodine tablets amid fears of a nuclear incident. Authorities handed out medication to parents and children living close to the Zaporizhzhia power station in Ukraine amid intense fighting there. Well, a team from the International Atomic Energy Agency is on its way to investigate a Russian-occupied facility, saying its safety and security must be protected. The Queen has sent a message to the President of Pakistan saying she's deeply saddened by the tragic loss of life and destruction due to flooding across the country. It follows an appeal by Pakistan for international support as more than 1,000 people have been killed. Unusually heavy monsoon rains have caused floods in both the north and the south of the country, destroying farmland, crops and impacting more than 30 million people. The government has confirmed Gibraltar's status as a city more than 180 years after it was first bestowed by Queen Victoria. The title was originally awarded in 1842, but it was then left off the official list of recognised cities. Now, a newly published record confirms Gibraltar's inclusion. Prime Minister Boris Johnson describes the decision as a huge accolade to its rich history and dynamism. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.169 and €1.170. The price of gold currently stands at £1,477.68 per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for real-time investment.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. Bit of gloom, I'm afraid. Breaking news, NASA have aborted the launch to today. I'm not going to try and pretend I understand why, because Mark is still with me in the studio. You were the one who your face fell the minute it came up. We have got a picture, if we can put it up, of the rocket now sitting there with that statement. Can we pop that up while Mark explains? There's rocket launch, and it says from NASA, Artemis launch, today's launch attempt has been scrubbed. Mark, take us through that.
So it was the leak of the fuel, the crack in the foam, which worried the flight director. There's always a danger if there's cracks, then there could be debris, and if there's debris where you could puncture, as we saw during the terrible Challenger disaster back in the 80s, there's a chance that you could rupture a fuel tank, and if you've got liquid hydrogen, liquid oxygen, you could end up with a massive explosion.
Let me butt in. I did the Challenger.
Oh, OK.
And we were, in the old days, I went in to do a 40-second news flash that turned into a kind of 2-hour programme. And the big story that emerged from that was that NASA officials had said there's something dodgy with this system, and the directors said, we're still going to launch.
And that's
absolute scandal at the time.
That's where the lessons, I think, have been learned. And I think mission directors, launch directors are so aware now of listening to the engineers, listening to the experts. You know, it might have been OK, but it's a massive problem.
Even though there are not human beings sitting on top of this one, which there were in the case of Challenger.
People are kept at a good distance so that if things do go horribly wrong, people are safe. But it could have happened.
Take us through what happens now. We sort of slightly tongue-in-cheek joked about battery life and abort systems and stuff, but what happens next?
So the engineers, they've not taken the step yet to take all the fuel out of the Artemis rocket. It's stable, there's no worries, there's no dangers, but what the engineers are going to do is try and collect data to try and understand what's exactly gone wrong, the details of what's gone wrong. They will at some point take all the fuel out and store it safely, but then we'll be looking to launch now 2nd of September. That's the next opportunity for NASA to safely launch, and so we'll be starting to go back to square one to come back to that.
So only about a week?
Launch. Yeah, only about a week.
And then there's another one on the 5th?
On the 5th, that's right.
OK, let's bring Maggie. Thank you very much. Again, keep watching in case they do make any other comments. I'm going to bring Maggie and Andy back, if I may, in that order. Maggie, the thing about windows, again, as an astrophysicist, it is the alignment of these great bodies and whether it's the moment at which it's best to leave Florida at huge speed to head for the moon as the moon's moving round us and we both are moving round the sun. Just take us through why the 2nd of September and the 5th of September are the next two windows.
So these windows are based about fuel efficiency. So you want to go there using as little fuel as possible. So getting these alignment rights is kind of the optimal time to launch your vehicle to use the least amount of fuel, because we know fuel is expensive. And if we're taking all this cargo with us, we need to have as much fuel as we can already. And it's quite good that the moon is quite close because the windows come around quite often, whereas missions to like Mars, the window for Mars is like 2 years. So,
right.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, as an academic who's an expert in a system that's 13 billion years old, a week, frankly, is almost neither here nor there.
Yeah, absolutely. And originally, Artemis 1 was planned to launch in 2016. So it's already like several years delayed. Another week, being on the safer side is not going to be such a huge problem.
All right, Maggie, stay where you are because we're still on air for about another quarter of an hour. But let me bring my other friend Andy back in now with the model and the expertise. I hope you heard what Mark said earlier on about the NASA team, brilliant men and women though they are, looking in great detail at the fuel system, the structure of it. You've got the model of the system there with you. What would you be most concerned about looking at as to what may have gone wrong?
They were talking a lot about trying to bleed some hydrogen through the engines to get the temperatures right. So all engines are temperature balanced, and that's really quite important. And engine number 3, I've got the model here, engine number 3 at the back end wasn't able to actually do that. And it's interesting, they said they weren't able to test that when they had the all-up wet test, which is when they fuel the whole vehicle and go through a routine test. The only thing they don't do is launch. But they weren't able to do that test during rehearsals, and that was because they had a hydrogen leak problem, which they had to solve. So today, this is the first time they've been able to do this sort of hydrogen drain through the system, hydrogen bleeding. And unfortunately, it has failed on one of the engines. That would actually concern me a little bit, because that's something that's happened before they've had a chance to fully test it. But having said that, having worked in engineering myself, that's why you have these projects, to see if they work or not. And now they've got a problem to solve. And there's no doubt they will solve this problem. It's one for the engineers to play with. But then this is the nature of the job, I'm afraid, in engineering. And as I guess absolutely perfectly said, you can't do this on computer simulations. You can only do this kind of thing with the physical equipment.
Andy, brilliant. Thank you for that. The next voice that you will now hear is Mark, who you just quoted back to him. I mean, not only being able to hold the model up, which Andy did brilliantly, and point at the actual engine that's in trouble. Very crisp analysis with which you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, you can't simulate these things in computers. The pressures, you can't see, you would never be able to simulate an unexpected crack in a system. So it's really important that these things are done in real life. But my big worry now is that, we've got a launch window that's a week away, and that's actually not a long time to get a full understanding of what's gone wrong and then to fix it. So really want to see, they're going to have to really knuckle down to get that resolved.
Andy, between you, both you and Mark have set out what the challenge is. Are you more optimistic than Mark is about being able to get that number crunching, design checking, computer checking done within a week?
Trust me, NASA's engineers are unbelievable workers. They are fantastic, and they're very professional, and they will go for it. They will do everything they can to actually get it right, and it can be done. It just depends, really, to be honest. Once they've drained the tanks and engineers can physically look at the engine, only then can you really tell what they can do. They could turn around and say, oh, it's a simple fix here, we've got a simple valve issue, or they could turn around and say, I'm sorry, we have to rip the whole engine out and put a new one in.
And Maggie, are there astrophysicists, I mean, as it were, pure scientists involved in this team as well, while they work out the state of readiness to get to those first next two windows that you and Mark talked about, or whether, God forbid, it's going to have to be a longer delay? Is this NASA chiefs and engineers like Andy, or are the scientific physicists in there as well saying, I've got something to contribute to this debate?
So these launch windows, they're calculated through computer programs, and I'm sure there'll be scientists involved in these calculations, and engineers will have a physics background as well. Many of them will be familiar with those kind of things.
While we were, and I'm going to change the subject slightly because I think I'm being told we've only got about 3 or 4 minutes left. But we were showing earlier on during one of your answers activity on the moon, and you talked about the ambition to get to Mars. And let's talk around Mars a bit finally. As I understand it, we've been able to get to Mars, and we've even been able to put rovers and explorer vehicles on the surface. But you said a few moments ago it's a lot trickier. Is the track record slightly better than you were implying, or have I taken the spin too much?
No, the track record for going to Mars is actually terrible because it's so much further away. There's also like several minutes of delay of communication. So like we talked about launch windows and different orbits, depending on how far away Mars is, it could take up to 20 minutes to get any communication relay back to Earth. So that's what makes it quite challenging.
So let's share a truth with the people who are kind enough to listen to our conversation, Maggie, either on TV or radio here at GB News. For every Mars rover and those brilliant pictures which we all got so excited about, how many went wrong?
Like 2/3 of them.
Ah, blimey. Did you know that, Harwood? That's taxpayers' money getting lost between here and Mars.
Well, it's not just that. If you even look at the the failure rate of, for example, the Space Shuttle programme, it was enormous. It's not odds that anyone would really want to
It's one of the worst things about the media, isn't it? When you report the good news, lip sealed on it. I'm going to come back to Andy, and then I'm going to talk to Mark, and I think our time is almost run. But I touched upon this earlier, but I want a little bit more from you, if I may, when you were talking about the vehicle needing to be modified to go to Mars, which Maggie was just so eloquent about on the science and the astrophysics of it. The vehicles that land, we do know, even if it's only one and 2/3 have failed somewhere else, the vehicles that do that work when they eventually successfully get to the surface of Mars are fascinating, phenomenal, because they are diggers, they are photographers, they are sniffers, they do all sorts of stuff.
Yes, they are. I mean, and the technology that's been used to get rovers to there with the drills and everything has absolutely been fantastic. But it's been a very difficult long haul, and it's been a very difficult haul to get to Mars. Mars isn't like the Moon. Mars's elliptical orbit is a very extreme elliptical orbit, which makes it very difficult. And although we have a 2-year window every time, there's actually a 15-year window, which is the best window. So it's a very complicated orbit, which has led to the failures of some of these things. And the equipment we can get there, which are robotic, which can do fantastic work, are wonderful. But at the end of the day, and this was proven with Apollo 17, when the first science astronaut landed on the moon, a geologist made discoveries because of the knowledge that geologist brought with him. And for the fact that he had his eye in to know what to dig for and knew what to look for. And you can't beat sending physical scientists to these worlds. And that's one reason we're very keen to do that. For all the technology you can send in the world, at the end of the day, you can't beat a trained scientist to go to these places. And that's one reason we're trying to push for it, to try and get the scientists there. And it'll start with the moon, with Gateway. And Gateway, remember, which is going to be the space station around the moon, that's probably how you're going to handle Mars, with an orbiting space station around Mars for astronauts to ferry backwards and forwards to the surface, and that would be the most efficient and safe way to do it.
Andy there, and Maggie also on the right of your screen. I've really enjoyed the last hour. Thank you so much for sharing your valuable time with us and sharing your great knowledge. Let's make a booking for about a week's time, fingers crossed, and we'll do it all again. But for the time being, Maggie from Nottingham University and Andy there with his model and his expertise. Thank you both very, very much indeed. Turning to you, who've been patiently sitting here and keeping me, hopefully, on track. I love the optimism that the engineer has, that the pure academic has. There's real optimism.
Oh, do you know what? Absolutely. And we've seen time and time again, we have got people on the moon before, and the technology from the Apollo missions, there's less technology on the Saturn V than there is in my phone. So the technology is far more advanced than it used to be. We can get to the moon, yes, and we have been to the moon, and we will get to the moon again.
Should my trade be more honest about the failure rate that Maggie was talking about?
I think, yes. Perhaps a little bit. Space is still a risky business. Yeah. And when you start putting people in spaceships, it becomes a more dangerous and more complicated. You've got to send food, you've got to send water, you've got to send atmospheric conditions. And
Tom's point as well, nobody wants to waste taxpayers' money, whether it be in the United States or in the UK. But if it's Bezos money or Musk money...
Absolutely. You might argue there's a case for taxpayers' monies to go towards robotic explorers, and Bezos's money to go towards human exploration of space. Maybe that's the way it needs to go in the future.
And final word to you before we read out what some of our lovely viewers have been saying about all of this. I don't know whether you are a betting man or not. I'm going to guess you're probably not, because you're far too sensible and grown up for that. But do you reckon we'll be gathering again on the 2nd of September, the 5th of September, or Maggie's months later than that?
No, I think, we got very close to the launch. There wasn't much more to be done. If we could solve that issue with the engine.
And they obviously took it right up to the wire.
And they were right up to the wire. There's always a sort of 30-minute hold at the 40-minute mark before launch, so we always put in a hold there. So we have taken it right up to the wire. There's not a lot more that could have gone wrong. So fingers crossed we'll see something on the 2nd or 5th of September.
Great, and enjoyed the hour with you as well, sir. Thank you very much indeed, and look forward to you coming back when we do it again. Great guest. And Tom, thank you very much indeed. I hope you enjoyed our conversation about the economics and the politics of it as much as the brilliant science from Maggie, Andy and from Mark. Lots of you have been getting in touch with your own thoughts about NASA's Artemis launch and the delay. Madge says, so Artemis is on its way to the moon. Any chance our candidates for Prime Minister might be given a free ride? Boom, boom. I love it. I love it. Paul joins the debate. I was one when man last went to the moon. This is so exciting, and there'll be more and better footage than the last moon missions. I was in my mid-teens and was in a swimming pool in America where my dad was working on a United States Air Force base, and we were all heard the whistle blow and told to get out of the phone, and we watched it on a tiny little black and white television set. Remember it as if it was yesterday. Mary says it is great that we're going back into space. Landing again on the moon is even better. I am so excited. And Matthew says it is such a shame that NASA has scrapped the launch today. I do hope that it works next time. Well, I think, Matthew, we here are at one with you on that. And don't forget, go and find your diary and a good pencil and just jot down September the 2nd and September the 5th, because fingers crossed and God willing, that is when they will try again. But as Mark, and I just want to underline this as my final thought, quite rightly said, and Maggie and Andy agreed with it, in these matters, even if there are not human beings on board this time, you don't cut corners, because next time there will be people sitting on top of that extraordinary rocket. That is all that we have time for today. I hope very much indeed that you can join the team at 1 o'clock again tomorrow, where the great Liam Halligan will be returning to the hot seat, continuing to focus on the cost of living crisis and helping you to beat the squeeze. This is Alastair Stewart. I'm Alastair Stewart, and that was On the Money. A very good afternoon to you. Bye-bye. Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking dry for many, although some showers developing across the north and the east. Let's take a look at some of those details. Many northern and eastern parts of Scotland will have a rather cloudy afternoon, where further west we'll see some sunshine. There'll be a few showers developing, especially over the high ground. Northern Ireland may also see the odd shower develop, but most will miss them and have a dry afternoon with some spells of sunshine. Northern England will see a fair amount of cloud this afternoon, but it'll then be mostly dry. The best of any sunshine will be along the Irish Sea coasts. Wales will tend to see brighter skies this afternoon, especially out toward the west. A few showers may develop, but most will be dry, with temperatures reaching the mid-20s in places. The Midlands will see a dry bank holiday afternoon, but there will be a cloud around, especially in the east. And despite this, temperatures will reach the low 20s. It may feel, therefore, a tad cooler than lately across East Anglia this afternoon, as a keen northeasterly breeze develops. It'll be dry, though, although rather cloudy. The east to northeast breeze will also be noticeable along the south coast this afternoon. Many of us, though, will see some sunny spells, especially out towards the west. Cloud will then melt away as we move towards the evening, but some showers will continue in the north. And that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but